A direct punch in the gut inside Biden's biggest crisis. As he races to withdraw from Afghanistan, yet the complexity of the situation on the ground, the urgency of the evacuation mission, and the unlikely partnership with the Taliban to control security around the airport had left U.S. troops dangerously exposed, and offered Biden and his team limited options to protect them. The group remained in the Situation Room for more than an hour, receiving updates from commanders in Kabul and poring over maps and images of the airport. Biden eventually decamped to the Oval Office, where he was updated by his National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Chief of Staff Ron Klain. As the day wore on, the situation grew progressively grimmer. Reports of American casualties eventually turned into confirmation of American deaths, news that reached the White House by midday. The death toll went from 4 to 10 to eventually 13, a devastating figure for a president who had yet to preside over a single U.S. combat death. The Marines who were killed were believed to be conducting security screenings of those entering the airport. One military official said they were so close to the crowd, "The breath of the person you are searching is upon you." Biden's national security team had little time to emotionally process the attacks, one official said, as they remained focused both on the airlift mission in Kabul, now entering its most dangerous phase yet, and a new objective to take out the terrorists. "Been a tough day," he said as he began a set of remarks he and his speechwriters had spent the previous hours honing. Biden wavered between weary sadness, a stark threat to hunt down the attack's perpetrators, and a staunch defense of his decision to end America's longest overseas conflict.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was time to end a 20-year war, Biden said before walking away from the podium and onto what he said was another meeting. Thursday was the deadliest day for American combat troops in almost a decade, and for Biden amounted to the worst day of his nascent presidency. A war that is almost over after 20 years is concluding in blood, anguish and, for the president who is ending it, fierce recrimination. Interviews with more than a dozen people, including White House officials, national security, and congressional aides and others close to the situation, reveal an administration consumed by events in Afghanistan, driven by the president's unmovable desire to withdraw troops while also struggling to contain the chaos of war. Biden's aides argue he is exactly the man for such a moment, a foreign policy veteran, a renowned empath, a military dad. Yet a legion of critics, including some Democratic allies, is now questioning whether his decades of foreign policy experience add up to sound policy or competent leadership at a moment of crisis. As Biden's approval ratings already show signs of slipping, fears are rising among Democrats that mistakes made in Afghanistan could derail the party's ambitious domestic agenda. While Democrats were attempting damage control, Republicans attacked what they viewed as clear and devastating missteps. A team of longtime Biden hands now faces scrutiny for not sufficiently preparing for what the president has said was inevitable chaos in the war's final days. Biden is currently focused on completing the mission in Kabul, aides said, but many of them expect he'll eventually hold someone responsible for what has happened. "I do believe some people on his national security team should resign. That's up to them and it's up to him," said Representative Adam Kinzinger, a Republican who has sharply disagreed with Biden's Afghanistan policy even as he has served as a regular critic of his own party. The White House says Biden isn't planning to ask any of his military leaders to resign in the wake of Thursday's deadly attack, and Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the president maintained confidence in Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has faced particularly harsh criticism for his department's role in coordinating the evacuation of Americans and Afghans who worked for coalition forces over the past 2 decades. Still, Psaki acknowledged there had been little time inside the White House to contemplate anything beyond the current evacuation mission, especially as Biden was warned during a Friday morning briefing that further attacks are likely as the military winds down its operations. "There's not a lot of time for self-reflection right now," Psaki said when asked about the current state of affairs in Afghanistan, in which the U.S. is forced to coordinate with the Taliban in the final days of the war. "The focus is on the task at hand." Asked to describe these final tense few days, another White House official said, "It's like a high wire with no net, and every single minute you could fall off." A ticking time bomb from the moment Kabul fell to the Taliban on August 15, American and Western intelligence agencies began warning of a heightened risk of a terror attack meant to create mayhem among the throngs of Afghans desperate to escape. Scores of ISIS terrorists had escaped from prisons across Afghanistan, fueling fears they could penetrate the security the Taliban had set up around the airport. In daily meetings of Biden's national security team, including through last weekend, a sizable amount of time was spent discussing what officials described as active threat streams coming from the Islamic State affiliate operating in Afghanistan. The intelligence streams were specific, serious, and credible in the days leading up to the attacks at the airport, a person familiar with the matter said. And while U.S. forces had been conducting counterterrorism operations around Kabul to try to mitigate the threat, officials were worried that it was a ticking time bomb, this person added. By Tuesday and Wednesday, the threat had become so acute that U.S. officials began informing other Western nations who were executing their own evacuation missions it was too dangerous to continue. At one point, U.S. intelligence officials had access to communication intercepts directly tied to a potential suicide vest attack, one U.S. official said. Finally, on Wednesday night, the State Department issued an ominous and highly specific warning to Americans to stay away from the airport gates until further notice. It was a last resort in a situation where the Biden administration already had extremely limited options, an official said. The warnings did little to disperse the crowds of Afghans desperately seeking a way out of the country. When the blast went off, bodies were scattered into fetid drainage canals, the survivors left to escape in a daze of horror. Many in the White House had been frustrated in recent weeks with the intelligence community's failure to predict how fast Kabul would fall to the Taliban. Even the most pessimistic assessments estimated it might take at least a month. This time, the intelligence the White House was receiving about a potential attack outside the airport was tragically spot on. One official who spent hours on Thursday in meetings and calls described finally getting a moment of respite, only to find himself staring at a TV tuned to the graphic cell phone video of bodies strewn across the scene of the attack. It was a direct punch in the gut, the official recalled. God forgive me if I'm wrong about that.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe